and the presence of the entire class, a sarcastic teacher presented her with a violin, anticipating that she would faint. Rather than speaking, she departed the room in complete silence, leaving him without a word. At 14, there was something about entering a new school that caused your stomach to feel too tiny for your body. As soon as she disembarked from the school bus in Bakersfield, California, Amara Jennings grasped the strap of her knapsack as the sole familiar object in this unfamiliar environment. Southridge Middle School was not extravagant. However, it exuded a sun-baked atmosphere that is exclusive to California. The brick walls were dusty, and the air was tinged with the subtle aroma of pavement. The front office was alive with subdued conversation and the occasional beep from the scanner. Upon her arrival, no one raised their head. Another newborn. The secretary printed her agenda while she waited patiently. There will be no small chatter. Absence of a grin. Papers slid across the counter, and a desiccated, "Your locker is located in the C hall. Keep your head down, baby." Her mother had instructed her. You are present to acquire knowledge, not to impress anyone. Yes, that was Amara's intention. There is no drama, absence of commotion. Her grades, her music, and her ability to successfully complete the academic year without incident. However, there was something about her silence that some individuals appeared to observe more than if she had spoken. By lunchtime, children had already coined her nicknames: Violin Girl, Chick who is muted, the new girl with the beautiful eyes. When she passed, she heard them all in murmurs. She was indifferent. Orchestra Room 117, her final period of the day, was of paramount importance. Amara's proficiency with the violin was not limited to this. She was extraordinary, not that anyone in this room was aware. She kept that aspect confidential, ensconced in her recollections of her grandmother. The violin bow she carried was not merely composed of wood and horsehair. It was the final gift she had ever received from the woman who had cared for her while her mother worked 2 jobs. She experienced an inner sense of stability each time she held it. Upon her arrival, Room 117 was already abuzz with conversation and adjusting. Her nerves were pricked by the commotion. Mr. Darnell, the instructor, was writing on the whiteboard with his back to the class while standing at the front. He was wearing a light grey blazer that was not quite fitting properly, and his voice was infused with a contrived sense of confidence. When he finally turned around, he announced, "We have a new addition," as if he were introducing a new chair rather than a human being. "My name is Amara Jennings. During the semester she will be a member of our team." She quietly nodded and slid her case onto the floor before locating a seat in the rear. A few curious eyes followed her, but the majority returned to the adolescent drama that had captured their attention. Mr. Darnell did not inquire about her. No inquiry was made regarding her musical instrumentation. He merely surveyed the room, as if he were already irritated by something. Amara established a routine over the course of the subsequent 2 weeks. She refrained from participating in group rehearsals, preferring to keep her music to herself. She did not wish to attract attention at this time. Nevertheless, individuals took heed. She maintained her sheet music in a precisely folded state, with pencil markings. Her posture was flawless. Her hand never trembled while holding her bow. Some of her peers realized that she was concealing information. During the course, a small number of students murmured. During tuning, a female named Brianna approached and said, "You are more talented than Darnell's pets, and you do not even attempt to compete." Amara simply grinned and adjusted her rosin. However, Mr. Darnell appeared to be offended by her calm confidence. It is possible that she did not ask any queries. Perhaps it was the manner in which she refrained from attempting to influence him, as some of the other children did. It was constructing regardless of its nature. It was palpable. It was as though he was anticipating the appropriate moment. However, that moment was approaching at an unprecedented pace. Amara had memorized every hallway at Southridge Middle by the 3rd week. She was aware of which lockers were stuck, which instructors permitted food, and which students were simply being loud to disguise their feelings of uncertainty. She moved silently, with her sketch pad tucked under her arm, headphones affixed to her neck, and the violin case always at her side. The faded initials JJ are worn in black, carved in close proximity to the handle. Mr. Glenn Darnell was distinct from the majority of the personnel. He refrained from raising his voice. He did not even speak at a high volume. However, his voice was audible, as if it were just weighty enough to elicit attention. His tone was razor-sharp, the type that caused pupils to sit up straight in their chairs, not because they held him in high regard, however, due to their unwillingness to confront the subsequent events. For more than 12 years, he had been instructing orchestra at South Ridge. According to some, he was once a dedicated musician, participated in a chamber ensemble. Perhaps they even conducted tours. However, those narratives were never recounted with admiration. Rather, they were similar to rumors that had followed an individual who had reached their peak a considerable amount of time ago, and had never quite recovered. Darnell had preferences in the classroom. It was visible to all. The same 4 or 5 pupils consistently received first-chair solos and shout-outs. The majority of them were from families that either donated to the school or had parents who attended each performance. Then, there were the remaining items. The athletes in the background. The filler. Amara was acutely aware of her position. She was invisible. She preferred it that way. Until the afternoon of a Monday. The Mozart string ensemble was being practiced by the class, and Darnell was in a jovial mood. One of the cello students had neglected their sheet music, which resulted in a disturbance. Threw a copy onto their stand with a condescending, "Please refrain from wasting everyone's time." From her position in the corner, Amara observed the events transpire. He conducted a thorough examination of the room, his gaze bouncing from one individual to another. Subsequently, without any indication, he ceased. Jennings. Amara's fingertips were still resting on the edge of her bow, as she gazed upward, in the midst of an adjustment. "You have been quiet," he stated. Excessively tranquil. A few children laughed. Still, others proceeded. "You have been present for nearly a month. I believe it is time for us to hear what you have to offer." She perceived a contraction in her bosom, not out of fear, from an alternative source. She had not adequately prepared to perform independently. Not today. No, not in front of this room. This individual is certainly not in the public eye. She persisted in her stance. She meticulously retrieved her violin. He stepped aside with a theatrical flourish, uttering, "Great. I would like to hear about the type of magic you are capable of performing." The words hovered in the air like poison. He did not intend to be kind to them. He spoke magic with a razor-sharp quality, as if he were encouraging her to humiliate herself. Amara maintained her composure. She brought the violin to her jawline, closed her eyes for a half-second, and inhaled slowly. Nevertheless, Darnell intervened before she could commence, adding, "Do not be concerned. We will not be overly critical." A few chuckles. Quiet individuals. The kind that caused more pain than those that were boisterous. Amara awoke. She refrained from gazing at him. She did not gaze at any individual. She participated in the game, but only one note. Then another. A slow, haunting refrain from a composition that the majority of the class would not recognize. Not ostentatious. Not excessively noisy. Precisely. Fluid. Alive. Her bow danced. The chamber underwent a transformation. However, Darnell did not flinch. Folded arms. Increased the tension in the jaw. The thoughts that were circulating behind his pupils were nearly audible. From what source did she acquire that knowledge? What does she perceive herself to be? Amara did not cease. Her fingertips gracefully traversed the strings, elevating the atmosphere of the room with each stroke. Nobody uttered a sound. Not even the most popular. The silence was as though the walls were under duress when she finally ceased. She reduced the volume of her instrument, retreated, and she tenderly placed it on her lap. Darnell did not respond. Someone in the background murmured, "Damn." Amara seated down, as if nothing had occurred. However, something had. The sensation was universally felt. Darnell, however, was not likely to allow that to be the conclusion. The classroom was markedly different the following day. Not excessively boisterous or disorderly. I have just loaded it. It was as though everyone had read a chapter in a book that they were not intended to, and they were now anticipating the conclusion. Amara arrived as she always does. She is wearing headphones around her neck, violin case in arms. She occupied the rearmost seat without initiating eye contact. However, it was palpable to her. Students are stealing glimpses, smiling from behind folders. Even those who had previously overlooked her were now taking notice. Darnell was already at the forefront, writing notes on the whiteboard. He failed to acknowledge her. Not a single gaze. Amara preferred it in this manner. She was not seeking recognition. She did not require validation. She simply did not wish to be involved in any situation. However, Mr. Darnell was never one to tolerate prolonged periods of silence. He turned around and clasped his hands once midway through the class. "All right, let's break the routine a bit." The room remained silent. "Today we will be experimenting with a unique approach. We will be performing a brief solo rotation, with each solo consisting of only a few bars. The performance will be conducted without the use of sheet music." A small number of children grumbled. One individual murmured, "Are you serious?" He disregarded them. "We will commence from the rear." Amara was discovered by his gaze. "Jennings, why don't you evict us?" It was not a query. She hesitated for a moment, not due to fear, but rather because she was aware of the nature of the situation. It was not a matter of listening to music. It was a matter of control, regarding the necessity of placing her in the spotlight once more in the presence of all. She approached her case with caution. The muscle memory she possessed was the result of thousands of hours of practice in a small apartment living room, where the fan was perpetually on. Her hands moved with precision. She rose to her feet. Darnell chuckled just loud enough before she could raise her violin. "I trust that we did not simply capture lightning in a bottle yesterday." This time, the students laughed with trepidation. Some individuals directed their gaze elsewhere. Amara was observed by others, who anticipated her response. She maintained her composure. She did not utter a single syllable. She participated in the game. This time, it was more than merely a response. It was a declaration. The first few notes penetrated the air with such force that they did not require authorization to exist. She selected a passage from Sound Cells. There is no simple solution, nothing courteous. It was complex, rapid, and daring. The class remained inactive. Darnell retreated. She played for 20 seconds, perhaps 30, and when she ceased, it was as though the walls had been holding their breath. Once more, silence. Darnell grinned. "Constrictive. Tense. Impressive," he stated, "for an individual who does not necessarily resemble the conservatory type." That concluded the matter. The atmosphere ruptured. This time, no one laughed. Even the students who typically found him amusing were taken aback. A kid in the front row gazed at Darnell and Amara incredulously, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. Amara experienced a state of paralysis. She gazed at him with eyes that were both serene and acute. She refrained from weeping. She refrained from violently departing. She merely gazed. Darnell proceeded, as if nothing had transpired. "All right, let's continue. Jonah, it's your turn." Jonah refrained from moving. His hands were mildly trembling. Brianna murmured from 2 seats away, "That was a mess." Amara sat back down slowly, placing her violin on her lap with her fingers still wrapped tightly around the bow. Her heartbeat was not necessarily rapid, rather it was exceedingly noisy, consistent. This was akin to maintaining a tally. She declined to attend her subsequent class that afternoon. She proceeded directly to the counselor's office. "He is not to be reported." She refrained from discussing the incident. She inquired whether there were any music organizations outside of school that she could join. Miss Diana Bright, the counselor, cocked her head. "Are you the same girl who played yesterday?" Amara hesitated before nodding. "You caused a stir throughout the entire music department. 2 of my colleagues inquired as to your identity." Amara gazed downward. "I merely desire a location where I can engage in recreational activities without it degenerating into something else." Miss Bright gazed at her, and then reached into a drawer, extracting a flyer. "There is a youth program in downtown that operates on Saturday mornings. The program is not concerned with one's background, rather it is concerned with their level of play." Amara retrieved the brochure and departed without exchanging any words. However, in a small institution, information disseminates rapidly. This time, it proceeded directly through the front doors.
The murmurs had gained momentum by Thursday. They traversed the cafeteria, hallways and classrooms that were unrelated to music. The teachers did not explicitly address the matter, however it was evident that they were aware of it. They now regarded Amara with a greater sense of curiosity, as opposed to indifference. It was as though they were attempting to match the information they had heard with the girl they had passed without noticing last week. Yet, Mr. Darnell maintained his composure, as if nothing had transpired. He maintained his normal routine, which included the same stiff posture, sharp remarks, and dry jokes. He appeared to be supporting himself with pride, rather than backbone. However, the students were no longer amused. He was currently being observed. Additionally, they observed Amara. Friday arrived in a hurry. Orchestra concludes the final period. Amara had entertained the possibility of forgoing the event. She had even made it halfway to the front office before turning back. She was not frightened. She was unwilling to provide him with another opportunity to manipulate an issue that was significant to her. However, she proceeded to enter, occupied her customary seat, and awaited. The violin case was resting against her leg. The air in the room was dense with anticipation. Even pupils who typically engage in playful activities were seated with a more upright posture, anticipating. Mr. Darnell achieved this by clearing his larynx. I would like to provide one of our students with the opportunity to demonstrate her true capabilities prior to the commencement of rehearsal. He refrained from mentioning her name. However, it was unnecessary for him to do so. Amara gradually raised her head. He nodded at her, as if it were a sign of respect. Jennings, would you be amenable to executing an act of your choosing? Each individual's gaze was directed toward her. The chamber maintained its respiration. She stood, picked up her violin, and proceeded to the front a few steps. Darnell smiled and said, "There is no obligation. We are all genuinely interested in the type of training you have received." Amara was cognizant of this. One final attempt to encircle her. She either buckled under the pressure of the attention, or she soars, rendering him appear diminutive. She resolved to refrain from contemplating him at all. She closed her eyes and recalled her grandmother's residence on Union Avenue. I could hear the radio buzz. She pressed the strings with her small hands until her fingertips were raw. She reflected on the weekends she spent studying scales instead of sleeping in. Every competition in which she performed for evaluators who harbored no expectations, until they heard the initial note. Additionally, she engaged in play. Not a single delicate item. Not a single secure. She has selected Shostakovich's Violin Concerto No. 1, a piece that is unforgiving. Either you achieved mastery over it, or you neglected it. Her mouth moved as if she knew where to go before I ate it. Flying fingers. Tempo is increasing. The room is dissolving one note at a time. She refrained from gazing at Darnell. Her companions were not observed. She was merely engaged in recreation.
Additionally, there was a change in the environment of the chamber, not in a manner that is overly dramatic. No applauding, no gasps, silence. It was as though time had stopped, to allow for attentive listening. The air itself was noticeably altered. She did not promptly raise her head after she had finished. She ceased playing the violin, exhaled, and maintained her composure. The chamber was devoid of sound, not because they were uncertain about what to say, but rather because they were attempting to comprehend the events they had just witnessed. Mr. Darnell opened his mouth, as if he intended to say something. However, nothing was uttered. Amara turned and returned to her seat. There was no acclaim. There are no comments. The type of silence that conveyed the entirety of the situation. She was pursued by a lad from the cello section in the hallway, following the conclusion of the class. "I've never heard anything like that," he said, his voice low, as if it were too sacred to utter aloud. Amara gestured with a slight inclination. "I am grateful." Brianna also caught up. Darnell's expression appeared to suggest that he had consumed a lemon. They both chuckled, but not in a mocking or loud manner. Nothing but the truth. Brianna inquired, "Will you be participating in the spring concert?" "At present I am uncertain." "You should." He cannot remain concealed behind sarcasm indefinitely. However, Mr. Darnell had no intention of concealing himself. He intended to defend himself in his own peculiar manner. Silence commenced the subsequent week, not the positive kind, such as after a spectacular performance. This item was considerably heavier, unusual. It was as though the entire school was once again holding its breath, anticipating an event that no one could identify. Amara maintained her customary cadence. Lower your head. Place the backpack tightly on one shoulder. The violin case is never far away. However, the weight of her strides was noticeable. It was not anxiety. Additionally, it was not a matter of vanity. I was in that in-between space, where a significant event has occurred, but the world has not yet caught up. She was summoned to the front office during the second period of Monday. She declined to inquire as to the rationale. She has just departed. Marcia Linley, the principal, was seated at her desk with her hands clasped. She was a woman of middle age, with a kind smile and weary eyes. Also present in the room was Assistant Superintendent Joseph Langley, in a sharp tuxedo, a smirk that is thin. He did not gaze at Amara, rather he perused a folder. Amara, Principal Linley stated, "We have received numerous calls from parents and faculty members over the weekend. There are those who are extremely complimentary, while there are others who are reportedly concerned." Amara maintained her silence. "Mr. Darnell submitted a report alleging that you interfered with class activities on Friday, that your conduct was deliberately contemptuous and performative toward the rehearsal structure. It was located there." Amara blinks. That concludes the matter. Eventually, Langley was able to glance up. "He alleges that you have undermined his authority." Principal Linley moved in her seat. "However, 3 other students submitted written accounts that commended your performance. 2 of our staff members who were not present in the room stated that they had learned about it within hours." Amara gradually inhaled. "I did not intend to offend anyone." Linley stated, "I have faith in you. However, I must inquire whether he made any insensitive remarks." Amara did not respond immediately. She had the option of expressing it. The remarks were reiterated. Accurately quoted him. Allow the system to address him. However, she was hesitant for a reason, not because she questioned her abilities, but because she was aware of the consequences. Her assertion was contradicted by that of another adult. Meetings, falsehoods, perhaps even punishment disguised as protocol. She spoke tenderly. "I simply wish to engage in a game. That is all she has ever desired." Linley hesitantly nodded. "You will continue to be permitted to attend class and attend forthcoming performances. I would like you to come to this location immediately, if you experience any discomfort." Langley did not utter a single syllable. He arose, closed the folder, and departed without a second thought. Things had changed since the last time we were in class. She was not addressed by Mr. Darnell, nor was her name mentioned. He scarcely acknowledged her. The tension had dissipated, but it was replaced by a frigid absence. He conducted himself as though she did not exist. However, what about the students? They witnessed every detail. A greater number of children began to inquire about her. "From whom did you acquire the ability to perform in such a manner? Is it possible for you to instruct me? Are you pursuing music after school?" Even some of Darnell's most beloved pupils had begun to stray. They continued to adhere to the lesson, however. Their attention was no longer directed toward him. On that Thursday, an unusual event transpired. Miss Deanna Bright, the counselor, approached Amara as she was at her locker. "Are you available after school?" Amara bowed. "There is an individual I would like you to meet." Miss Bright introduced Amara to Miss Thelma Rowe, the director of the Bakersfield Youth Ensemble, in a tranquil recess of the music wing later that afternoon. The woman appeared to have spent her entire existence in concert halls. She was elegant, but not stiff. Although her voice was welcoming, her eyes were piercing. She stated, "I was informed of your existence." The manner in which individuals communicate would suggest that they entered the stage with a torch in their hands. Faintly, Amara smiled. Rowe leaned in. "We have an opening for our spring showcase. You would be the youngest soloist we have featured in 5 years. I would like to invite you to participate." Amara hesitated. "What if my school discovers the information?" "They are likely to do so. However, they will be unable to take any action." Amara practiced like she had not in months that evening. Her grandmother's bow was steadfast in her hand, as if it had anticipated the path ahead of her. However, Southridge had not yet completed her. Neither was Mr. Darnell. Not entirely. Southridge experienced a sense of division by the second week of March. I am not overly vocal about it. Rather, I am divided. The students who began to observe Amara with a degree of admiration were among them. Subsequently there were a handful of individuals who murmured at a volume that was audible, "Pet of the teacher. She believes that she is superior to all others. She intentionally portrayed him in a negative light." Then there were the educators. Some individuals smiled more when they passed her in the hallway. Others withdrew their gaze. In a calm, neutral tone, Principal Linley announced over the intercom on Monday morning, "We will be conducting a student forum in the library this Friday after school, to address the topics of equity and respectful environments in our classrooms. Attendance is entirely voluntary, and no names will be mentioned. There will be no finger-pointing." However, the subject matter was well known to all. On that particular day, Mr. Darnell failed to attend class. A substitute arrived, bewildered and unprepared. He stated that Darnell had taken a few days of personal leave. The pupils exchanged glances but refrained from posing inquiries. Amara did not respond. She maintained a low profile and focused on tuning her violin. The forum arrived promptly. Initially, Amara intended to abstain from the event. She loathed being at the focus of any activity, but Miss Bright halted her in the hallway on Thursday afternoon. "You are encouraged to attend. You are not required to contribute any commentary. However, you are entitled to hear the opinions of others." Consequently, she proceeded. The library was crowded with students, instructors, and a few parents. Principal Linley, Miss Bright, and 2 student leaders comprised a diminutive council situated at the forefront. The microphone was handed around. Matteo, a young child, was the first to speak. Some educators believe that silence is a sign of respect. However, there are instances in which we remain silent because we are apprehensive about speaking up. Brianna then rose to her feet. "We all witnessed an unjust incident in class, and the majority of us chose to remain silent. This is also our responsibility." Amara listened attentively. Her fingers twitched gently, as if she were running through invisible scales, as her hands rested in her lap. "I finally received a question from an individual. Is it possible for the student to express their thoughts on the subject?" The room swiveled. Slowly, Amara stood. The microphone was not seized by her. "She has just spoken," she stated. "I did not wish to serve as a lesson. I arrived at this location with the intention of acquiring knowledge, as was the case with all other individuals. I never requested to be placed in a position of responsibility. I simply executed the instructions given to me." The chamber was devoid of sound, and when an individual informs you that your voice or talent is not appropriate for a particular environment, it remains with you, even if you are aware of the truth. Even if you have dedicated your entire life to demonstrating the opposite. A guardian raised their hand. "Are you asserting that the educator was racist?" Amara halted. "I am stating that he made a decision. He did so in the presence of all. You are responsible for determining what you have observed." Miss Bright appeared to be perceiving an entity that was more substantial than a single student. Following the forum, students approached her in a respectful and discreet manner. Some individuals recounted anecdotes, other classes, other incidents, and topics that they had never previously dared to discuss. Amara discovered a note that had been concealed within her compartment the following morning. Entered. "There is no name." A solitary line, "The sound of truth being played without fear, was brought to our attention by you." Miss Rowe verified Amara's participation in the presentation that evening. Downtown, 22nd April. In the interim, Southridge initiated an internal evaluation. Although they did not refer to it as an investigation, that is precisely what it was. Teachers were requested to evaluate their instructional procedures. A week later, Mr. Darnell returned, subdued, colder, and visibly uneasy. He abstained from her altogether. Amara was unconcerned. She was not acting for him. She performed for the child in the 3rd row, who began to bring his violin home once more. For the educator, who at last recognized the oversight she had made. For the girl who used to conceal her sheet music, because she believed that no one would notice. However, her true moment was yet to arrive, and it would be more impactful than any classroom could ever be.
The downtown Bakersfield Civic Center was not particularly grand, but it appeared to be larger than life due to the soft stage lights and low hum of conversation. Families arrived in weekend attire, with some carrying flowers, and others simply beaming with enthusiasm. A respectable audience attended the Youth Ensemble's spring showcase annually. However, this time was different. The program had been disseminated online, and one name had begun to garner attention: soloist Amara Jennings, 14 years of age. The heels of her feet bounced gently on the floor as she waited backstage. A violin case was open, and sat beside her. Within, her grandmother's bow was resplendent, smooth, polished and unwavering. Miss Rowe discreetly entered the room. "Are you prepared?" Amara raised her head. "I believe so. You are not required to demonstrate anything to them, or to me. You are only required to do so to yourself." Amara blinked once. Upon her name being announced, there was no applause. Rather, a hushed silence descended as everyone sought to pay attention. She exited with composure and assurance. Her fingertips were relaxed, and her posture was impeccable. The gentle scrape of her bow, settling onto strings, was captured by the microphone. Subsequently, she performed. There is no dramatic introduction. There is no conceit. Pure sound. She exhibited control, but not rigidity. With emotion, but without disorder. Each note contained a narrative that had not yet been published. Additionally, she managed to silence an entire auditorium without uttering a single word. More than mere admiration, reflection. The ovation did not commence immediately after she concluded. A breathless silence lasted for half a second. Subsequently, hands united, resulting in a more powerful and audible construction. A few individuals maintained their position. A few individuals dabbed away tears. Miss Bright also stood in the third row. Brianna followed suit. Amara sat on the folding chair behind the scenes, her hands trembling, not from anxiety, but from relief. It was completed. The following morning, a local arts blogger published an article regarding the performance, called her a prodigy, with poise. The incident was initially reported by a local newspaper, and subsequently by a regional newsletter. Not a significant amount, but sufficient to be observed. Enough to cause a reverberation. Mr. Darnell maintained his solitude in his classroom. He was informed that he had been requested to relinquish his leadership position. There was no public reprimand. There is no need for an apology. Subtle repercussions. Although he continued to instruct his students, his level of acuity had diminished. The same was true of the strut. A few students observed. Others were indifferent. Amara observed. Additionally, she declined to address the matter. She was invited to participate in a small youth panel discussion on representation in the arts 2 weeks later. At the conclusion, a young girl, who was likely 12 years old, approached, clutching her mother's hand. The female commented, "You bear a striking resemblance to me. I was under the impression that only individuals of great fame were capable of playing in that manner." A small amount of kneeling was performed by Amara. Fame is unnecessary. Patience and a small amount of passion suffice. Amara and her mother were seated on the veranda of their residence that evening. The city lights flickered beneath them. Her violin was unaltered, and sat beside her. Her mother spoke gently. "You did not allow it to alter your character." Amara gazed into the darkness. "It altered my perspective, however. I remain unchanged." Her mother nodded. "Your grandmother would have wept uncontrollably." They both chuckled. And for the first time, Amara permitted herself to experience pride, not because she was superior to anyone else, but because she had accomplished her assigned task. She ensured that her music was more audible than their uncertainty, louder than a teacher who attempted to diminish her. She had never received a sideways gaze that was as loud as this one. She refrained from responding with words. With her gift, she engaged in combat. And it was sufficient. Remember this: if someone attempts to confine you in a box, you are not composed of plywood. You are composed of all the elements they neglected to comprehend. Long after they cease to listen, allow your voice to be the only sound they hear. If you are interested in stories such as this, please subscribe. Because there are certain truths that should be spoken aloud, unmistakably, and without apology. The thoughts that were circulating behind his pupils were nearly audible. You significantly disrupted the entire music department. Amara maintained her customary cadence. We have received numerous calls from faculty and parents over the weekend. A warm tone emanated from her voice. Things that they had never had the courage to discuss. Untouched, you did not allow it to alter your character.